Hello, I'd like to talk to you today about the doctrine of the Trinity and specifically about this. There's a Greek word, homoousios. And this is just some details into the development of the doctrine of the Trinity. And I've got a little outline here. I'm going to try this and see if it works. Trinity. Where did it come from? What is it? The Trinity is basically a Christian doctrine that their God is made up of God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and these three form one God. Um, Most anybody can, any Christian scholar can attempt to explain this doctrine, but all those in the end, it seems that everyone comes to that it is a mystery doctrine that you just accept. And I would just like to try to delve into that further and just give some details to people about it and just for your information. So, but this is very interesting. So stay with me. It's very interesting if you care about these things. That is. But anyway, okay. I've got a little outline here, and it hopefully it'll kind of lead up to the thought pattern I've got going. Anyway, so Trinity. What is a Trinity? Where did it come from? What's the history? Well, the first thing, I've studied the history of the early churches, and I would put that around the year 300. The time whenever Christians went from being a persecuted people to a free people, even preferred as a religion. And that happened after the Edict of Milan in the early 300s. And shortly, a few years after that, the emperor of the time, Constantine, he called a council. He invited like 1,800 bishops that from the Roman Empire and the surrounding area. Of those 1,800, they were allowed to bring with them priests, bishops if they liked. I think it was two priests and a bishop. And they ended up with something like, some reports commonly today says 318 bishops came. So we'll say about 300 bishops came, and they brought priests, they brought deacons, and there was something like 1,800 people there. But the 300 bishops have the vote. Now, the point of this was to decide Christian doctrine, and the first bullet on that was trying to figure out and get it thoroughly established what Jesus was. Was Jesus God? And so they met for a couple of months, and at the end, I don't know, they probably met longer than 2 months, but it was at least 2 months, and they come to the point, the impasse, if you would, of those who believed that Jesus was the same as the Almighty, or the same as the Father, and those who thought he was similar, kind of like. And there was a great deal of frustration, and those who did think that, then they found this word. They didn't invent this word, and I want to come back to that in just a minute, but they got this word homoousios, and that means of the same substance. And that was kind of the breaking point between their thoughts, those who believed he was the same as the Father, and those who did not believe he was the same as the Father, not being the same person, but of the same stuff. And that's kind of a weird theological way to think. It's very strange even to me, but it was a decisive word that wouldn't allow the opposing party to interpret it in an Arian way. And I didn't mention Arian, but Arians was the other side. The people who believed that Jesus was the same substance with the Father, and those who didn't, but believed he was some sort of exalted being, and so on and so on. Again, this is like the year 325. I mean, it's well historically documented to some extent. They know like the month and the day whenever it started. They know it went on for months. They know there were about 318 people there. So this is a real important event in church history, and I would encourage anyone to do a great deal of study on that and become familiar with it, because that's where the church became the church, in my opinion. Okay, so we had the Council in Nicaea. They use this word homoousios, and it means of the same substance. And some people tried to wiggle out, and didn't work in the end. And some people got banished or exiled or whatever. And it went back and forth for years. If you study on through the years what happened, people went back to Arian view mostly, and then finally in the end, one of the Roman emperors used his authority and influence and said, no, this is it. Called another council, the Second Council of well, I'm not going to say, I don't remember what it was, and that's whenever they changed the Council of Nicaea doctrine. They modified it and updated it, and made it a bit more Trinitarian, and it was the rule, and no one could oppose it, and it was unchangeable. I mean, they had some other councils after that, and that's what they said. It's not changeable. That's what it's going to be forever. So 325, they had this deal, and they used this non-biblical, theological, philosophical, whatever word, homoousios, and it simply means the same substance. And like if I said there is a glass of water, and the stuff that's in the water is homoousios, it's of the same substance, and you might, well, if it was a pure glass of water, that would be an accurate way to say it. If I said my dog and my cat are homoousios, you go, what? What are you talking about? Dog and cat are not of the same substance. And my point is, whenever you use the term in reference to a specific, some specific parties, you're saying something. You're saying something very specific that can't be misunderstood, and that's exactly the reason why they use this word. Now, what I'm talking about today is this word, and there's something very interesting about it that I've learned only recently. And in explaining that, it goes, homoousios, same substance, homoousios substance, and that's Greek, by the way. And Tertullian, he is a significant figure in the early church, and he's much earlier. He's back towards the end of the 2nd century, like 180 or so, to the early 3rd century. And he was a man who, in his early 40s, became a Christian, a part of the Catholic Church, and he only remained in the church for like 10 years, and he adopted views that were heretical and got kicked out. And I think it was Montanism that he became a part of. But he is a significant figure because he introduced simple things like New Testament and Old Testament. That was Tertullian's invention. He introduced this word. As far as it seems that most people they attribute this word homoousios to him, and again, whenever you use this word homoousios and you use it in reference to some specific parties, there's no doubt about what it means. It's it's unmistakable. So back before the year 200, anyway, Tertullian introduced this term, or it was at least in circulation. All right, now that's established. Before the year 200, Tertullian introduced it. It was established. At least people who were scholarly knew what it meant, and it was kind of obvious anyway. Okay, now I want to jump ahead a few years to the year 260. We'll say, Tertullian's dead by now, and there's this other guy on the scene, and his name is Paul of Samosata, and I might not be saying that right, but Paul of Samosata. He was a bishop. He was the bishop of Antioch, and there's a famous set of councils that were held, the councils, the synods of Antioch, and there were like 30 meetings. These guys got together concerning this man. There was some questions about his dealings with money, and some questions about him maybe being promiscuous. I don't know. It was stuff like that anyway. But one of the things that came up with this man, Paul of Samosata, was his theology. And in his theology, he used this word homoousios, the same word, homoousios, that was used at the Council of Nicaea in the year 325 to explain unequivocally how that the Father and the Son are made from the same batch of stuff. And so whenever this man, Paul of Samosata, whenever he came on the scene and his theology was circulating, he used the word homoousios for the same purpose. Now, the interesting thing here is that whenever he got in trouble and he was deposed, whenever he got, kicked out of his being bishop, he also, the thing that was rejected about him was they rejected his word homoousios. Now remember, this word is a very simple thing. It just means of the same substance, and he used this in reference to the Father and the Son, as I understand. I invite anyone to go out there and look and but the thing that really makes this clear, and why I can say it with certainty, is at least, looking through the historical records, the people, those in 325, let's just say 268 or 270 for round numbers, it's 30, there's 65 years, 67 years or so later at the Council of Nicaea, whenever they finally got around to using this word homoousios again, the people who didn't agree with it picked that argument up from the synods of Antioch back whenever they rejected it so many years ago and said, hey guys, look, we rejected this. What are you doing picking it up now using to describe the thing that you kicked this guy out over, among other things. And so we can know by their reaction to this that it was indeed the same thing. So, if nothing else, it proves that this thinking that Jesus was of some kind of same substance with the Father was absolutely not accepted back then. It wasn't like this was an obscure thing where the people, they were just off in a corner and said, we don't believe it. It was the synods of Antioch. It was a famous group of councils. They met for like 30 times over the period of something like 8 years. And so this was absolute proof that this idea that Jesus and the Father were the same substance, it was not accepted. It was not even kind of accepted. It was rejected. But because the people at the Council of Nicaea couldn't find another way, they picked this word up and they used it again. Yeah, it's a decisive word and it got their point across, but it wasn't what historical Christians believed even back then. So I find this very interesting, and I invite you to do your study. History is a wonderful thing, and studying the history of the early church is real interesting. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of things that we can uncover along the way if we just take the time to study and look into it.